Hello and welcome to Mr. C History. Now I am on Putney Heath in southwest London, and I've come here to find out about the history of duels and dueling, that ancient art of aristocrats and poshos where they used to solve their disputes with a fight. It's probably best to start with a bit of history of dueling. Now it goes way back to medieval times with knights and the jousting, and traditionally it was with swords, and it was with two aristocrats. If they had a dispute or whatever the case, and one of them felt, at least one of them, maybe two of them, felt that they needed to defend their honour, they would meet and they would fight with swords, etc. Things get a bit interesting though by the late 18th century and early 19th century with the invention of pistols and guns, of course. Because with swords you could fight off and that was all okay. You might possibly not die, or you might get cut a little bit, or indeed you could fight somebody down, get their sword off them, you've won. With pistols it's a bit harsher. Bang, and you're dead. Also, pistols was seen as more of an equaliser. Sword is hard to negotiate and hard to get training on. Pretty easy to win if you're very good. Pistols, anybody could do it. You could just pick up a gun and shoot. So by the late 18th century, early 19th century, dueling becomes very, very interesting. The other big question, of course, is why Putney Heath? Well, Putney Heath becomes synonymous, and with neighbouring Wimbledon Common as well, synonymous with duels in the early 19th century. Why? Well, it's not actually that far from London. It's a day's ride, that's fine, but it's discreet enough that you don't have to be doing it across town. It's also quite flat and open plain, so you can do your paces and your shoot. And then obviously the historical precedent. It starts here, so people do it more and more. Putney Heath is seen as the place. You need to solve your problems, you come here to Putney Heath. The first duel I want to talk about took place here in the middle of Putney Heath, and outrageously it involved the Prime Minister, William Pitt the Younger. He was the youngest Prime Minister ever. He came to power at age 24 in 1783. By now he's a bit older. Is he wiser? Arguably not, if he's having a fight here on the Heath. His dispute was with a man called George Tierney. George Tierney was a popular Whig politician, the other side to Pitt, and he was very much against Pitt's wars and his economic policies as well. And they had a huge haranguing match in the House of Commons a few days before. Tierney felt that Pitt had accused him of being dishonest, so the day after that debate in the House of Commons, Pitt got a letter in the mail from Tierney saying, "I challenge you to a duel," and Pitt accepted at once. And so they came over here to Putney Heath. Now they came here to Putney Heath and they did their 12 paces back to each other. They turned around and they both fired. Luckily, they both missed. Pitt then fired again, but this time he fired way up into the air, and at that point the seconds, so they are the people that you bring along to sort of judge it, almost like the referees, they said, "I think the matter is now over, the dispute is settled, that's absolutely fine." They actually shook hands and then off they went. Extraordinary. Now the reaction was interesting. The press thought it was hilarious. There was Gilray did that sort of famous portrait of it, all fine. But the king at the time, King George III, he was very unhappy. And the next time he had an audience with William Pitt, he said, "This is outrageous, this is not prime ministerial behaviour, you shouldn't solve your disputes out in the public." So perhaps Pitt kind of lost in the end there. A significant first duel of a prime minister. Just over 10 years later, another political dispute was settled here on Putney Heath, this time involving George Canning and Viscount Castlereagh, the two titans of early Victorian politics. George Canning at the time was Foreign Secretary. Viscount Castlereagh wanted his job. That really is kind of the nub of it. There were disputes about dealings in Napoleonic wars and campaigns, etc., but there was a bad blood between the two. And so they came here to Putney Heath to settle their differences. Interestingly with this though, one of them actually does get injured. Canning is shot in the thigh. It was a sort of graze off the thigh, not enough really to kill him or cause too much damage, because I mean medicine at the time would have been great, but it's still not great. Canning missed. The seconds and everyone else said, "That's enough, I think this dispute is sorted." It actually did create a bit of a political vacuum. Lots of people decided to disown them. Their working relationship was totally over. and Canning eventually had to resign. But Castlereagh does get the job eventually, 1812. He's Foreign Secretary from 1812 to 1822, throughout the height of the the victories over Napoleon, etc. Sadly though, in 1822, Castlereagh takes his own life. I think he'd suffered from depression for a lot of his life, so a sad end for that. And actually Canning, in 1827, he finally gets the absolute top job. He becomes Prime Minister in 1827. Sadly though, he dies after 119 days, and for many years he was the shortest living, or the shortest Prime Minister ever in time in office. That of course has now been taken over by Liz Truss. Another future Prime Minister that nearly got involved with a duel here at Putney was Benjamin Disraeli. In 1835, right at the beginning of his political career, he challenged the Irish MP Daniel O'Connell, a real proponent for Irish Home Rule. He challenged him to a duel. I think O'Connell had called him a wretched creature in public, so Disraeli said, I'm going to a duel. Now O'Connell said, actually, I'm not going to fight, I'm going to send my son, Morgan. I don't know what that quite ultimately means, but he was going to send his son to fight Disraeli, and it got pretty close, but then the authorities intervened and it was stopped in the end, so it never actually took place. I mean, that would have been incredible. This is Wimbledon Common, just next to Putney Heath, and this was another popular site for dueling. Very good open plain, you can get a good long shot on here. And indeed, a very, very famous duel took place here, which actually involved a member of the royal family, specifically Prince Frederick, the Duke of York. He was the second son of George III, King George III. And in 1789, he had a duel here with a man called Charles Lennox. It started in some drunken party, I think. Lennox had accused the Duke of saying some disparaging words about him. And so, to defend his honour, the Prince said, I challenge you to a duel. And so they met here on Wimbledon Common. Now, interestingly, Charles shot the Duke first. He fired first. It actually hit the Duke in his wig. He had one of those comical late 18th century massive wigs, and it hit one of his curls and it flew off. So bad news there. He was fine though. He was uninjured. The Prince though, he said, I'm actually not going to fire at all. I bear no malice to this man. I'm so sorry about all that. All is forgiven. Shall we just move on? I mean, if you're going to come here, you're going to do it. Come on, just get on with it. Anyway, so that was all the end of that. It was all actually a bit of a hush-hush. The newspapers didn't hear about it much because I think they were a bit worried. This was 1789, the year of the French Revolution. Seeing a British monarchy cavorting and doing silly things like that, whilst the French are seeing off their royals, wouldn't have looked so good. So it was kept on the down low a bit. So it didn't really have too much significance and impact. Now, by the 1840s, dueling sort of dwindles away and it ultimately stops. And there's several reasons why. One of the main reasons, in 1828, it becomes illegal. They pass a law in Parliament to say it is the wrong thing to do this, it is illegal. It does still carry on sort of secretly in these sort of more discreet places a bit, but I think definitely that would have put a big end to it. But obviously by the 1840s, new Victorian ideals of, the Corn Laws and the rule of law and things like that, and with the rise of a middle class, etc., it doesn't seem to be the right thing. There was another significant duel which does put a bit of a nail in the coffin of duels. It didn't take place here around Putney Heath, Wimbledon Common. It actually took place in Windsor, but it involved that cad Lord Cardigan. He was challenged to a duel by one of his officers. I mean, he annoyed everybody, Lord Cardigan, in 1840, and they had a duel there. It missed and everything, nobody died, but it was quite significant in that Cardigan was arrested, obviously, because this was he broke the law, and then he was released on a technicality, and its whole thing of perceived the upper classes were being treated in a different way. It had quite a big impact. But in the end, what was the significance of dueling? Well, in this period of 1780 to 1840, between 200 and 300 people actually died, were killed in duels. The ones we've looked at have been a bit silly and a bit funny, haven't they? People have just been grazed in the thigh and their wigs going off and stuff. But actually people did die. There was an intent to kill, and obviously medical knowledge at the time wouldn't have been great. So it was a dangerous, dangerous thing, and it just gets so old-fashioned and it moves away, really. There is a romance, of course, all associated with it, but it is quite a brutal affair. Anyway, as always, I hope you have enjoyed that. It's been wonderful to go around and see the sights of these duels. Please don't forget to subscribe. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.